pure business, according to the AP. They're saying that Biden and Putin, they kind of worked things out a little bit. Not a lot of fanfare, but not a lot of, takeaways. Nothing really kind of explosive happened, which is good. And nothing too shocking kind of happened either. So kind of a big, fat nothing burger. Well, so why are we talking about it? Because it's kind of a big deal. And on this channel, we've been hearing for a long time how big a problem the relationship is with Russia, right? We heard a lot of the criticism from the Democrats, from Biden, from basically everybody who was anti-Donald Trump at one point or the other. We even had, I remember Stephen Colbert, right, called Putin's something holster, something about genitals, something, not appropriate for late night TV. Even if it is late night and awful TV, but they're still, shouldn't be saying stuff like that. But that was the implication that Donald Trump and Putin, they were sort of, two peas in a pod singing Kumbaya around the campfire together. And Russia, lo and behold, that everybody's been telling us is this really horrendous geopolitical foe that the United States needs to take seriously. We know that the Democrats, their allegation was back during the 2016 election that some Russian, hacking took place or something that influenced the election. They were upset that some Russians, I guess, bought some Facebook ads somewhere. And so, a lot of people said, well, was that really consequential? Did it matter at all? Doesn't matter. The narrative had already been written. Russia's responsible for all of our ills. They're probably responsible for Donald Trump. Remember, Trump was supposed to be a Russian puppet, and the list goes on and on. So today was going to be the big day that Joe Biden was going to go over there and set the record straight. Tell these Russians, we are sick of your hacking. We are sick of you interfering with our elections. We're sick of all this other stuff. And so we want to see, did that happen? Because we heard a lot of that language back during the campaign. A lot of criticisms towards Donald Trump based on his posture with Russia. So let's get some backstory here. Then we're going to take a look at some of these images. First and foremost, I want to show you what's going on here. What was that transition? Let's change that, shall we? Turn that off. Let's do a mix. Let's see how that one works. Yeah, that's what we want right there. That's good. That's better. All right, we like that. So pure business at the summit. No hugs, no brickbats. This was written over here by Jonathan Lemire and Vladimir Ishankovov. So we've got maybe some people over there at the Russians, AP Bureau, whatever. President Joe Biden and Russian President Vladimir Putin concluded their summit on Wednesday with an agreement to return their nation's ambassadors to their posts in Washington and Moscow. Right? So remember sort of how this works. If you have a little bit of a quarrel between countries, everybody goes, how dare you? We are taking our ambassadors home. And so they just pull their ambassadors out of the facilities there. They take them out of the ambassador post. They bring them home. And everybody goes, wow, Russia just recalled their ambassadors. The United States just recalled their ambassadors from Russia. Oh my gosh, are we on the brink of World War III? No, it happens all the time. Then what ends up happening is they say, well, we're going to have this really important summit. And what are we going to do? We're just going to send the ambassadors back. Oh, we're just going to send them back. So we're just bring them home, send them back, bring them home, send them back. That is foreign diplomacy, my friends. Well done. So they're going back now, and they're going to plan to begin work replacing the last remaining treaty between the two countries limiting nuclear weapons. So that's good. But the two leaders, they offered starkly different views on difficult simmering issues, including cyber and ransomware attacks originating from Russia. Oh, I forgot about the ransomware. Yeah, that was the other one. Apparently the Russians were responsible for the Colonial Pipeline hack as well. Putin insisted anew that his country has nothing to do with such attacks, despite U.S. intelligence indicating otherwise. Biden, meanwhile, said he had made clear to Putin that if Russia crossed certain red lines, including going after major American infrastructure, his administration would respond, quote, and the consequences of that would be devastating. Okay, so that's coming out of Joe Biden's mouth. So sounds kind of Trumpian, really. The consequences of that would be devastating. Didn't he say something about that to little rocket man Kim Jong-un over there? We're going to basically eliminate you or something like that. And everybody goes, oh my gosh, World War III. Everybody flipped out about it. Here is Joe Biden saying that he's going to, basically devastate Russia. And it's just sort of, mom, no hugs, no brickbats, pure business, according to the AP. Now, a lot of this is very interesting because one of the things that you typically see out of these little, charades is that you put both of the politicians up on the stage, and you sort of watch how they interact with each other. So historically, we put Trump up there. I think Trump was in Helsinki or something with Putin last time, and and so I think there was a basketball that was exchanged or something, and everybody was very, very upset about that. They said that Donald Trump was a little bit too cordial, right? To use Colbert's holster analogy, that's sort of where that was going. Everybody said that he was in Putin's back pocket, and so I can understand why perhaps the Biden administration may not want to actually, go through that again and do a press conference where you put both of these puppets up there on the stage and you just kind of watch how they interact with each other. So they didn't want to do that. I mean, to their credit, the whole thing's a joke, but they sort of did not do that. They did not want to do the press conference, and they might say because they didn't want to lend any credibility to Putin. They didn't want to share the stage with an evil person like that. In reality, I think it's because, Putin sort of has a little bit of vigor to him, and Joe Biden, well, he has a little bit of vigor. We're going to see some vigor today, but we're going to see whether it's good vigor or bad vigor. There is good vigor, and there's not so good vigor. We're going to see which one we've got there. So I also want to make note of this. It's very easy for one politician to start running their mouth when there's nobody else on the stage to stop them from running their mouths. So that's the other point of putting them both up on a stage, is that one of them can say, what? I didn't say that at all. Because the whole theory here is you kind of cram them all into a room. So I'm going to show you the picture here in a second, but let's do it right now. Let's take a quick look at this picture. So, oh no, I didn't get it perfect. So here is the close-up of the two guys in the room. Now, on an expanded view, you'll see that sort of to Biden's right, you've got Anthony Blinken over here, and then on Putin's left, you've got somebody sitting to his left. So, it's four people in a room, then they break out. They're supposed to have this talk, stop hacking our stuff, stop interfering in our elections, blah, 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 right? And then they will come out now, and they're supposed to, after that sort of private, cordial, candid, off-the-record conversation, come out and give a press conference and say, hey, this is what we talked about. We were meeting behind closed doors. We wanted to make sure that we could be candid with each other, so there was sort of a safe space for us to talk and that the media wouldn't be there. But then after that conversation's over, they're supposed to go in front of the press and actually tell the press about what they had or what the conversations were about. And then if there is an issue, if, let's say, Biden comes out and says, I warned Russia that if they interfere again, that the consequences would be disastrous, then Putin can say, actually, that never came up. I understand he's concerned about that, but I expressed to the president, Russia does not believe we're responsible for this. And we actually believe that many of the U.S. cybersecurity hacks are emanating out of the United States, which is what he actually said. And so as we're going to see as we go into the story today. But the point is, we didn't have that opportunity. We couldn't put them both up there and have them compare and contrast their statements. So there's no verification of this. So then Putin just takes the stage. He does his own press conference, and he talks about how amazing he is and how great Russia is. And then he says a bunch of stuff that who knows whether it happened or not. And then Biden does the same thing. He does his own press conference. He runs his mouth, and there's no ability to verify what happened behind closed doors because nobody was back there. So it's very convenient, right? It's very convenient for these bureaucrats to do this and sort of, get a lot of press about it. Hey, we're working through our issues. Meanwhile, nothing happens. All we're doing is just sort of sending our ambassadors back to where they were. That's a good thing, though, because that means that they're back there. So the next time we get mad, we can pull them back again. We can take them back home, send them there, pull them back, and around we go. That is our government in action. Let's take a look at this picture. So this was the handshake heard around the world. Everybody's talking about this handshake. So, this is like a Rorschach test. It kind of depends what side you're on, how you sort of frame this out. It looks like we have a nice, strong handshake there. I mean, I will grant you that. We're going to zoom in, take a closer look at the handshake here in a minute. But you'll notice, if you go on Twitter and you go in the lefty Twitterverse, you're going to see that a lot of people are very happy with Joe Biden and how he approached this performance. We don't have the video here, but they're going to say that Putin, wouldn't look him in the eyes, right? So you're going to hear a lot of that talk. If you go to the right side of Twitter sphere, you're going to say that, well, Putin looks like he's just, kind of laughing his ass off here. Just kind of like, are you kidding me? Who am I shaking hands with right here? And then we've got, this sort of plastered on, smile for the camera's face over here. So, it's always fun to make fun of these types of people in these little things because apparently a lot of people, think that matters. Let's take a look here. We already saw this picture. So here they are seated. There's an image going around that apparently Joe Biden had some flashcards here. There's a lot of sort of Twitter commentary about flashcards. We have over here was the actual meeting, right? So we've got these two, people sitting across this aisle here. Who knows if anything meaningful took place. Here's a closer shot of that handshake. And I gotta tell you this, Joe Biden here does look like he's squeezing pretty hard on that hand. I can see a little bit of a crease of Putin's skin right here, and it's just sort of bunching up around the edges. So he's gripping hard there. So we'll say that's good vigor from Joe Biden. We've got good vigor and bad vigor, and so that's good energy. America. All right, so Joe Biden's shaking hands. Now, the big question that comes out of all of this, of course, if you're talking about American interest, and if you're saying, hey, we go through a lot of this stuff with the intent of having a positive result. Otherwise, it's just kind of masturbatory. You know what I'm saying? We want to see some action. We want to see problem presented, a dialectic engaged in, and then a solution proposed and acted upon. And my question always, anytime the government does anything, is, are we thinking that way? Are we thinking about solutions? Or are we maybe just making people feel good and trying to talk about doing the right thing and sort of, focus on these broad, very indefinable concepts like justice or like, social justice or environmental justice. And we're going to address the root causes of the immigration problem. Well, what does that mean? I don't know. Fly down to Guatemala and tell them don't come? I guess that's something. But the point here is, are we actually seeing incremental progress? Are we moving towards something that is beneficial? Let's see what we've got here out of this summit. So the question is from the AP, will Putin change his behavior? Biden was asked at a post-summit news conference. He said, quote, I said, what will change their behavior is if the rest of the world reacts in a way that diminishes their standing in the world. Biden said, I'm not confident of anything. I'm just stating a fact. We're going to take a look at this clip here in a minute because that got a little bit bad vigor. Now, both leaders have stirred escalating tension since Biden took office, suggested that while an enormous chasm between the two nations remains, the talks were constructive. Putin said there was, quote, no hostility during the 3 hours of talks, a session that wrapped up more quickly than expected. Putin held forth for nearly an hour before international reporters, right? So they finished that little talk that we just kind of went through here, this little thing, right? 3 hours, bunch of, shuffling papers around. Then we've got this. Putin goes out. He goes in front of people for an hour. International reporters. He shows defiance at queries about Biden, pressing him on human rights. He also expressed respect for Biden as an experienced political leader. And we saw that historically. I mean, we saw that, I think, even before this summit, what Russia has been doing, and I think China's been doing it as well, sort of scrambling jets. I've got a story in here that I think earlier this morning, the Russian military was sort of, sending some ships around the Hawaii area, causing the U.S. to scramble some, F-35s or whatever they're flying. And it's all part of this game. Everybody's moving their pieces around a little bit. So now Putin is doing that in front of the media. Russia noted that Biden repeated wise advice his mother gave him and spoke about his family, messaging that Putin said might not have been entirely relevant to their summit. So you see what he's doing there? Right? He talks about this a lot. Putin's very good at this. So is China. And we're going to see what they're doing here. But basically, sort of Putin is doing that that nice insult. He says, well, while Joe Biden's a wise man, he was telling me about his mother and he spoke about his family. Wasn't really related to international diplomacy or anything that Russia cares about, but that's good for Joe. At least he's telling us about that. And he says it demonstrated his moral values. So that's how he's talking. And then he says, he's been a very, well, what do you think about him? Well, he's certainly been a politician for a long time. I'll give you that. It's like when you're on a debate stage and you say, can you say something nice about your opponent? And you say, yeah, I mean, he's like the best communist I've ever seen in the world. He's great. Yeah, I mean, if you're talking about somebody who wants to sort of, eliminate all of your rights and freedoms and liberties, he's excellent at that. He's really good. One of the best. Nobody better than that. So Putin's doing that same type of thing here with Joe Biden, and nobody knows any better. Though he raised doubt about the U.S.-Russia relationship, he said it could soon return to a measure of equilibrium. Putin said that Biden is someone he can work with. He said the meeting was actually very efficient. It was substantive. It was specific. It was aimed at achieving results. One of them was pushing back the frontiers of trust. Sounds pretty nice. President said that there was an agreement between the leaders to return their ambassadors to their respective postings, which is just excellent. So pack up your bags, boys. You're going back. Both countries had pulled back their top envoys as relations chilled. So Russia's ambassador to the U.S., Anatoly Antonov, was recalled from Washington about 3 months after Biden called Putin a killer. Okay, so this is the language that now we're sort of concerned about a little bit. He called Putin a killer at one point, and Russia was so mad about it that they said, hey, we're taking our ambassador home now. How do you think about that? So now U.S. ambassador to Russia, John Sullivan, he left Moscow 2 months ago. So Russia pulled theirs first, it sounds like. So Biden starts it. He calls it a killer, Putin a killer. Moscow takes their ball home first. Then the U.S. turns around and takes their ball home first. And then Russia suggested he return to Washington. Putin said the ambassadors were expected to return their posts in the coming days. So that's good news. The meeting in a booked-line room had a somewhat awkward beginning. Both men appeared to avoid looking directly at each other during a brief and chaotic photo opportunity before a scrum of jostling reporters. Now, this came up. Biden nodded when a reporter asked if Putin could be trusted. Uh-oh, that's weird, because that doesn't really jive with this killer concept. So if Putin's a killer, how do you trust the guy? So a reporter asks him if he could be trusted. Biden nods, but the White House quickly sent out a tweet insisting that the president was, quote, very clearly not responding to any one question, but nodding in acknowledgement to the press generally. So when you see stuff like that, there's a word for that. It's called cope, right? Like coping. You see, you can sort of like make that a noun. Like I see that as cope, right? This is something that, people on the internet say, and I happen to be on the internet, so I say it. This is very clearly cope, right? Biden says, reporter, hey, Mr. Biden, do you trust Putin? He goes, yeah. White House, their Twitter team is on high alert. They're just, crap, boom, right? Fire that out, because they got to be on high alert, red alert, not because of anything, that Russia's doing, but because Joe Biden is out there speaking now. So let's take a look now at, we talked about some good vigor, the handshake, and now let's talk about, not so good vigor here from Joe Biden. Now, the New York Post is reporting this, says that Biden blows up at a news conference after the Putin meeting. This was published today by Steve Nelson, Bruce Golding, on the defensive and appearing on edge after ceding public relations advantage to Russian Putin at their historic summit. I don't know what was historic about it, but Biden lashed out at the American press at the end of a short 33-minute briefing. So he tried to wrap up his Q&A after fielding questions from just 6 journalists. So a very big, important event, something that the media has been saying is historic. We take 6 questions from 6 journalists, okay? During an appearance lasted 30 minutes, about half the time that Putin spent during his own news conference. They were in Geneva, Switzerland. And we're going to hear from Biden, but let's just read through the transcript first and foremost. He says, what I said was, and let's get this straight, I said what will change their behavior is if the rest of the world reacted to them and they diminish their standing in the world, he said angrily. I'm not confident of anything. I'm just stating facts. Biden erupted again when Collins followed up by noting how Putin had denied any involvement in cyber attacks against the U.S. and downplayed Russia's human rights violations. Then asked Biden how their meeting would be considered constructive. Biden says, if you don't understand that, you're in the wrong business. Okay. So we're going to watch that clip here in a second. Now, before taking any questions, Biden acknowledged that his staff had told him ahead of time which reporters would get a crack. He said, as usual, folks, they gave me a list of people I'm going to call on. Why is that, right? It's because they have it all prepped out for him. Speaking to reporters before Air Force One a few minutes later, Biden apologized for having been short with Collins, right? So he's apologizing back to CNN. Now, this was posted over here by Curtis Hauk. Says, why are you so confident Putin will change his behavior, Mr. President? I'm not confident I'm going to change behavior. What the hell? What the hell do you do all the time? Why am I so confident? Here's Joe Biden.
Are you so confident he'll change his behavior, Mr. President?
Yeah, I'm not confident in changing behavior. What the hell? What do you do all the time? So when did I say I was confident?
You said in the next 6 months you'll be able to determine.
What I said was, let's get it straight. I said what will change their behavior is if the rest of the world reacts to them and it diminishes their standing in the world. I'm not confident of anything. I'm just stating the fact.
But given his past behavior has not changed, and in that press conference after sitting down with you for several hours, he denied any involvement in cyber attacks. He downplayed human rights abuses. He even refused to say Alexei Navalny's name. So how does that account to a constructive meeting as President Putin framed?
If you don't understand that, you're in the wrong business. Did you find
Is the summit with
Yikes. So, that's bad. That's bad vigor there from Joe Biden. He's not, that's not his shtick, right? The anger with the press thing, that's a Trump shtick. Joe Biden is that confused old man that everybody just goes, oh, it's just Joe. He just doesn't know what he's doing anymore. So we're just going to let him just kind of, walk around. When you have that sort of outburst, it kind of reminds you of somebody maybe having, we'll just leave it at that. So Joe Biden, doesn't look particularly good there, humbly speaking. But the bigger point on this whole thing is he didn't answer the question, which happened to be a pretty damn good question. Kind of the only good question that we've heard recently from any journalist anywhere. Happened to come from CNN. Hey, you came out here and said blah, 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 all that garbage. But what about the idea that when we ask Putin some questions, he basically is denying everything. He's saying, nope, it's all the U.S. It's all your fault. Biden just gets mad about it because she has a great point. What's he going to say to that? Well, what? You're right. I said a bunch of garbage before the election, and now I have to eat that because I'm not acting on what I said about what I spoke about previously. I was making a bunch of claims about Putin, and now when it's time to put my money where my mouth is, I kind of fold, don't I? So that's why he's angry. And it makes sense. He should be angry because it's a great question. Now, let's carry on. He says also during the news conference, Biden mischaracterized the death of Capitol Police Officer Brian Sicknick. Remember him? We talked a lot about this case. He clashed with supporters back during the January 6 riots. And when asked about to comment on that, Putin was likening federal prosecution to scores of rioters, to his own crackdown. Biden called it a ridiculous comparison, right? So we've seen this happen previously. We saw this happen with Antony Blinken and the Chinese delegation. Remember, they came, I think that was over somewhere in near Hawaii, that side of the world. And they came, and Blinken comes out there and he says, hey, China, we're very mad at you. We don't like what you're doing with the Uyghurs. We don't like what you're doing with censorship. We don't like what you're doing with all of these things in the world, and so on and so forth. And the Chinese consulate just turned around and he said, excuse me? What did you just say to me? You're saying that we've got issues here in our country? How about you slave-owning Americans that have BLM and racial protests burning down half your cities? Maybe you should think about yourselves before you start criticizing us, right? And so we've seen this happen. Now, Putin is doing the same thing. He's saying, if you're going to be criticizing us about, federal prosecution of rioters, or if you're going to be, mad at us about Alexei Navalny sort of arresting our political prosecutions, or you're going to come criticize Russia for anything like that, we're just going to do exactly what China did. We're going to turn it right back around on you and cram it down your throats. So how about you deal with your humanitarian problems before you come into our house? And right, it's a pretty good point. I think it's a pretty good point. It's one thing for literally criminals to break through a cordon and go to the Capitol, kill a police officer, and be held accountable than it is for people objecting and marching on the Capitol, saying, you're not allowing me to speak freely. You're not allowing me to do A, B, C, or D. So when I said it was a good point, I wasn't sort of endorsing Putin's ideology here. I'm saying what he's doing is a smart negotiation strategy, right? He's saying, don't come into our house and throw stones because you're living in a glass house yourself, right? Not a good idea. So it's sort of this moral superiority thing that we see coming from the Democrats a lot, right? That, they're going to come down there and wag their fingers down our noses, talk about how awful we are, and they're going to go around to the rest of the world and do the same thing to them. Well, many Americans here are going to just accept that. Just say, yeah, I guess I am a racist. I guess I am somebody who's just an awful person. And I'll just go ahead and accept your pejorative framing of me as an individual, which, these other countries just aren't going to do, right? And there's a huge portion of Americans, myself included, you as well. That's why you're on this show watching this channel, that we're just not going to accept that framing, right? We just say, nope, if you want to live your life thinking that everything's a racist, oppressive nation, you're welcome to do that, but we're not going to live that way. And neither are these other countries. China's not going to stand for it. Russia's not going to stand for it. The CRT people, the people who are, trying to engage in political prosecutions that want to use this stuff to their political advantage, they may be able to get away with that here, but these other countries are not going to allow it to happen, as we are seeing. So when Putin then makes that comparison, now Biden comes out, and rightfully so, right? They're not the same thing. He says it's not the same thing to compare both. Biden also said he told Putin that certain critical infrastructure should be off limits to attack, period, by cyber and other means, talking about critical infrastructure and other things. He pointed out to him, we have significant cyber capability, and he says he knows it. He doesn't know exactly what it is, but it's significant. If in fact they violate the basic norms, we will respond. Cyber, he knows, in a cyber way, whatever that means. So, you know, the language is kind of escalating a little bit, right? He's talking about devastating consequences and, you know, we're going to respond and all of that. But then the big thing that stuck out here is that he is saying that Trump supporters, I believe, murdered a police officer in the Capitol, which when I listened to this, I was thinking, but that didn't happen, though. I mean, I remember that you put that in the impeachment articles against former President Donald Trump. I remember that everybody in the media was screaming about this. You guys had a lot of Democrats who were really milking his death for their own political gain. I thought it was reprehensible and sort of a disservice to him and his family and his memory, but they did it anyways because it served them ideologically speaking. And now Biden, of course, because he doesn't know, he doesn't know much about other than what he's sort of being told. He's just sort of parrots whatever, the last hoax was. He was talking about the Charlottesville hoax for a long time, the Fine People hoax, all of these sort of things that are just not accurate. He just keeps spouting off because he can't really remember, I think, anything differently. Here is Joe Biden now talking about Trump supporters, murdering a police officer, which of course didn't happen. Here he is.
Mr. President, when President Putin was questioned today about human rights, he said the reason why he's cracking down on opposition leaders is because he doesn't want something like January 6th to happen in Russia. And he also said that he doesn't want to see groups formed like Black Lives Matter. What's your response to that, please?
My response is kind of what I communicated, but I think that's a ridiculous comparison. It's one thing for literally criminals to break through cordon, go into the Capitol, kill a police officer.
Wrong.
And
Wrong.
be held unaccountable.
Wrong.
And it is for people objecting and marching on the Capitol and saying, you are not allowing me to speak freely. You are not allowing me to do A, B, C, or D. And so they're very different criteria.
Mr. President.
So not a bad answer, right? I mean, that was a fairly good answer. I think that what's happening in Russia is not quite the same as what's happening with BLM, and especially if you sort of, I think, segment BLM into different categories. Let's be generous here and look at it in a light most favorable to BLM. Let's say that we did separate them into different buckets. You have the people who are okay torching down used car lots and Wendy's, and then you have the people who want some justice reform. And I think that might be reasonable, right? We sort of separate them out. And I might disagree with how they want justice reform. I might disagree with all 7 of their statements that are on their website, which are all politically based, not justice reform based. I think there's only one statement of their 7 of their BLM demands that actually has anything to do with justice reform. But my point is really the same, right? Political organizations are kind of not the same thing at what Russia's government is doing, taking Alexei Navalny and some other people who would, in a democratic country be considered legitimate opposition and sort of rounding them up and throwing them in, horrendous prison conditions. So Biden's right. It's not quite the same thing, but he's also wrong that the Trump people killed a police officer. Okay, we know one officer, if I recall correctly, died from suicide. We also know Sicknick died of natural causes. Took like 3 months to get that report finally. They milked that one to death until that was no longer possible for them to do, and the actual news came out. And then the other people who died, Ashley Babbitt was shot and killed by a police officer. Still don't know who did that one. And we've also got other people who died essentially from natural causes or stress-related injuries based on their involvement there, right? Hearts gave out, or they had, complications as a result of the physical activity. So just wrong on that, just absolutely wrong. Can grant him that. Now, that being said, he didn't look particularly, vigorous up there. So maybe he was saving that for that blowout with the CNN reporter. I mentioned earlier at the start of the show that Russia was kind of, poking Biden, poking U.S. defense officials before this all started. The U.S. Navy, we see this was published earlier today, published 9 hours ago as of this morning, that the Navy conducts massive drills in the Pacific right before the Biden-Putin meeting. Okay, we've been seeing this. Russian Navy, they've been conducting exercises 300 to 500 miles west of Hawaii, prompting the U.S. on Sunday to scramble F-22s, 3 of them. F-35s. I think the F-35, right? Isn't that program that we spent like $1 trillion at, and it doesn't even have an airplane yet? CBS News, citing U.S. defense officials, reported on Tuesday, Russian bombers never entered the air defense zone. Report said Russian officials called its exercise the largest in the Pacific since the Cold War. Do you think it's any coincidence that they're doing it right now? U.S. Pacific Fleet Defense Department did not immediately respond to hours after the email inquiry. The exercises come as the president and Putin plan to meet on Wednesday. Russian Defense Ministry said that the drills involved up to 20 surface combatants, submarines, and support vessels. Russian news agencies reporting this. List goes on. It was happening outside of Honolulu. The paper said a Russian surveillance ship last month delayed a U.S. missile defense off of Kauai. Paper said the ship was loitering in international waters for several days. So the Chinese are doing this. We talked about this here on the channel, right? There's the tongue-scraped depression down there over, I think, near the Bahamas, where they do the underwater sub-testing, the Navy Area 51, as they call it. And the Chinese have these souped-up fishing vessels that are filled with all sorts of, surveillance equipment on there, just floating around up there. So we're seeing what the world thinks of the posture here of the United States, and you can be the judge of what you think of it. So let's take a look at what Joel Pollack over at Breitbart is saying. He sums this up quite nicely. He says that Joe Biden got nothing in Geneva, and Vladimir Putin got everything. He said Biden gave Putin almost everything he could have wanted there at their Geneva summit. Said he elevated Putin above other leaders, including American allies. Failed to force any real concessions on Russian policy. He says the degree to which the summit was a disaster became evident when Putin emerged from his press conference alone with the forum all to himself. He got to have an hour to just go out there and clear the record in front of everybody. Biden was not there to challenge him on anything, which way he just let him do whatever he wanted. So he's been running his mouth saying he's going to go, be tough guy with Putin, and then didn't even stand on the stage next to him. Biden team, says Joel, did not want to appear with Putin at a joint press conference after the meeting, both because Biden would look frail next to Putin and because the media dogma that President Trump had somehow done something terrible by behaving cordially when appearing alongside Putin in Helsinki, Finland in 2018, right? So Trump took the stage, Biden didn't. Putin, when he was up there, he fielded softball questions from Russian news agencies, but he also welcomed hostile questions from the U.S. media. In fact, Putin, an enemy of press freedom, was more polite than Biden would be, right? Because we didn't see an outburst from Putin over there, and he took far tougher questions, according to Joel. The opportunity to defend his own position and to attack the United States without fear of contradiction by Biden, who should have been standing there, was a massive gift to the Russian president. He used the old Soviet tactic of pointing to American problems as a way of deflecting from questions about human rights and political opposition, right? Which we already talked about this. The Chinese do this. Everybody else does it. They're using, many Americans are using this sort of moral superiority as a sword, right? To go into other countries or to go into other, classrooms and say, you're a bad person unless you believe like us. And so when we go and try to do that, they just say, well, we're just going to use your own standards against you. And it's a good argument. So maybe the better argument should be maybe we shouldn't be sort of, preening moral authoritarians all the time and talk about things that maybe don't involve sort of touchy-feely minutia. Just one man's thought on that. He did so without contradiction. He cited Black Lives Matter movements as an example of human rights abuses, right? He said he knew no American journalist would object, because how can they object? They can't. They go, oh yeah, we've been saying that for a long time. It's a good point there, Putin. You're right. We also hate our country. So here it is. We'll finish this up. We've got reporters press the two leaders separately to reveal what commitments, if any, Putin had made to change Russia's behavior, but there weren't any. Putin walks away from Geneva with no significant response to cyber attacks. Okay, no, nothing. With the Nord Stream pipeline, the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which Trump had opposed. Okay, so now Russians they're gonna build their own pipeline. So in the United States, we don't get a pipeline. Keystone, doesn't happen here because we have environmental problems. We want to save the planet. Donald Trump, though, opposed the Russians doing the same thing. They want this Nord Stream 2 pipeline to be built. He said, no, we're not gonna back that, because what that's going to do is it's the environment, whatever. What that's going to do is give Russia a very nice pipeline of oil that they're going to need, which is going to make them less dependent on external resources, which makes them a little bit more independent themselves and makes them a little bit more of a threat to the rest of the world, because they don't have to engage with the rest of the world to get a very vital, necessary resource. So Trump thinks about it strategically. I really don't know what Biden is doing, sort of, backtracking on that. So now they get to build a pipeline in the United States. We don't get one. It's kind of a twofer double loss for the United States vis-a-vis the Russians here, because now you've got, well, if you're a liberal, now you've got a pipeline that's being built that in your philosophy is going to wreck the planet, but you also have a less stable geopolitical environment, because now Russia can isolate itself a little bit more, knowing that one of its vital resources is being provided for through the pipeline that Biden just approved. What else? We have no real pushback against his aggression in the Ukraine. Notably, Biden met with Putin before meeting with the Ukrainian president. The meeting is to be announced. The response of the American media echoed Biden's posture of appeasement. CNN, which had raised the alarm when Trump and Putin appeared to get along together, gushed. They gushed about Biden's optimistic tone at the summit and how wonderful it was that Biden and Putin seemed to be having a friendly conversation. During the 2020 campaign, Biden claimed that Trump was unwilling to take on Putin. Putin leaves Geneva a winner. Joe Biden got nothing. All right, so that is over from Breitbart. Thought it was a very nice summation of kind of what I am sort of feeling right now, so I wanted to share that with you. Let's take some questions over from watchingthewatchers.locals.com. All right, we've got first in the house. We've got Speech Unleashed. Says, I think Putin would have been all for going against Biden on the same stage, and Biden knew it. That's why they didn't want him on the stage together. I agree with you, right? It's sort of probably the right move, candidly. You know, if you're, I would have liked to have seen them up there together, because Joe Biden has been talking a big game. I mean, all the Democrats have been talking a big game for a long time. 2016, Russian interference. We saw there was, hints of that this last election, and this was the moment to call them out. Many people on the left basically say that the Russians helped Donald Trump steal the election from Hillary Clinton, that the catastrophe of the Trump presidency for the last 4 years was all a direct result, literally, there are people who think this, of Russian interference with the election. This was the moment. This was the big day for Joe Biden to go in there and get some repercussions for what they did to this country. And he didn't do that. Didn't even take the stage. Oh, we talked for a few hours behind closed doors, and then I'm going to scream at a reporter for asking me a legitimate question about whether he held him accountable or not, as he said he was going to do. All right. We've got Want to Know says, Biden did say that criminals broke into the Capitol and killed a police officer, and BLM is about free speech. And that's why Putin is putting down his insurgents to the world press. I'm surprised he didn't blame Trump, too. I was going to take this image. There's an image of Joe Biden looking at a cue card, right? His flashcards. And there's a whole statement on one of the videos. I think OAN did a zoom in, sort of telescopic photo zoom in lens. And the whole thing's about just ripping on Trump. I'm like, you can't remember that there, Joe? All right. We got Sharon says, I'm sorry, but I don't believe a syllable of this AP story crediting Biden with taking a firm stance against Putin. But on the other hand, if Biden is in China's pocket and Russia and China are rivals, makes me wonder, cui bono, who benefits? It's a good question. Yeah, it's a good question. Look, if I had to guess, I would say that China is really the master puppeteer of a lot of things happening around the world right now. If I had to guess. We've got Leafy Bug is in the house. He says, when are we going to concede that what is being done to Biden is elder abuse? How can the U.S. lecture Russia about its human rights abuses when it's forcing a senile old man to be president? It's a good question. When Joe Biden was going after that CNN reporter, I was like, whoa, okay, we're going to get a little bit of intensity out of him. Let's see what he's got to say. Then he sort of murkied around in front of everybody, and then he opened his mouth, and then it's like a mumbled jarble of marbles were falling out of his mouth. And everybody's sitting there just waiting for him to go, oh, what's he going to say? What's going to happen next? And he was able to muster up enough of a sentence or two. Then he passed it back off to the reporter, and she asks a follow-up question that's really substantive, that actually matters. And he just kind of says, if you don't know better, you're in the wrong industry. Yeah, which is really insulting. I mean, I think that might be a little bit sexist. I don't know what ethnicity that woman might have been, but she might want to look into that. Sounds like some white supremacy going on there. We got E. Dantes in the house, says, these press people, they don't know what they're talking about. They're all in the wrong business. These lying, dog-faced pony soldiers. President Joe Biden. Yeah, I mean, I have no love for the press. Maybe Joe's on to something. We've got Jeremy. What's up, Jeremy? Haven't seen you in a bit. He says, there is no contest for professionalism and presence and the ability to speak in with international leaders when comparing the 45th and the 46th presidents. Ooh, yeah. It's a good one, Jeremy. I like that. We've got Sharon Quidney says the only difference between the January 6 political prisoners and Putin's rivals is in the living conditions afforded the prisoners. Another good comment. Thank you, Sharon. And we've got Nadarb over here says, I don't know if you saw this, but I shared a video to the community page where a cop pushes a man off the top of a tall staircase during the Capitol chaos, and that man later died. But all we are hearing is everyone died naturally. What else don't we know? Wow. So we're talking about this next, Nadarb. We are going deep into Capitol Hill. I'm not sure how deep it is, but I'm going to tell you where to go deep. That is the Revolver.news story. Yeah, I did not see this video. I've not seen that, but I didn't realize that that person had actually died. Is that? Oh, Miss Faith put the video. Here's the video. I don't think there's any audio. Oh, my goodness. Did that guy die? Wow. Okay. So, yeah, he kind of did get pushed off there. I have not seen that. No, I did not realize that happened. And I didn't know that guy might have died. Wow. Interesting. The point is, yeah, there's a lot we don't know about what happened at the Capitol, and we're going to take a look. Next up, we've got No Doubt is in the house. Says the Russian pipeline transports oil from Russia to Europe. Provides them a market for their oil. Oh, okay, so it's the opposite way. So thank you for correcting me on that. So it's going to go from Russia out while destabilizing oil producers in Russia. So strategically, that is poor if conflict between Europe and Russia erupts, as they will be dependent on Russia for their part of their oil supply. Okay, so cool. So that's awesome, which is why I love this show. So I got corrected on that. So I was saying that maybe, the Russians are going to be importing oil. No, it sounds like they're going to export oil, which might mean that the basis for Trump opposing the original pipeline would have been more something like maybe the U.S. wants to be the supplier of the oil to the Russians, and they don't want Europe to be sort of held hostage to their oil supply from the Russians. That gives the Russians a little bit more leverage over Europe than the United States, which may want to be the sole provider of that vital resource. So excellent. That was awesome. Thank you, No Doubt. Very much appreciate that. And our last one in the house, we've got Osak71 says, hey, Rob, big fan. So I'm very disappointed with Mr. Biden right now, not for the current reasons or issues, but more on a personal level. The reason is when Biden claimed he is now the president, I made a choice to start learning the Chinese language. Now Mr. Biden has placed us in another bad place with the Russians. So now I don't know what language I should learn first. Any ideas would be helpful. It's a good question. I would probably pick the language. I'm not real familiar with either of them, but I would pick the language that has more pronouns, because you're going to want one that gives you a lot of pronoun versatility, because we have, I think, like 100 of them now. I don't really know what the total limit is, but in the United States, we speak English here. We have of course, he, her, they, them, theirs, all those. But I think we also have like Z's and Zers, and those are complicated. And there's also, I think, some like animal pronouns, like cat-ish pronouns, and it's very complicated. I really don't know the extent of where this is going to go. So if you're going to be picking a language, I would pick one that has a lot of expandability for all the various pronouns that we're going to need to be using in modern America for the foreseeable future. So good luck, Osak. Let me know what you decide. Maybe I'll learn that one myself. All right. So thank you for all of those questions.